Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is the first presentation for Learning Unit 2. So in this unit, we're covering 14th and 15th century Europe, the Italian and the Northern European Renaissance. In the first part, we're going to just be talking about Italy, mainly Florence and Venice. So there are slightly different styles going on in the Italian restaurant versus the Northern European restaurant, which is in the region of Flanders, which is way north up from Italy. So obviously they're going to have different ideas and styles and kind of because Flanders is quite far from, the ancient Rome and Greece, there's less of a classical influence there. However, there is nonetheless a renaissance going on all over Europe because it's a new era. Um, we have a new kind of economic class growing, wealthy merchants and bankers. And cities were experiencing major growth, not just through this new wealth coming in with trade, there's also a population boom. Um, and then the bubonic plague ended up cutting the population in half. So, that added to the kind of different structuring of society. It wasn't just economic prosperity. So there were multiple factors leading to this big shift from medieval and Byzantine Europe to the Renaissance Europe, which will lead us into the modern era. So one of the main differences is that we are shifting from, royalty and the Catholic Church to focus on the individual's own power and own ability to create a happy life. Um, and that really affects the way art is created. And it is really related, the humanism is also related to linear perspective because it's just one individual, one individual's perspective looking at the work. So, all of the orthogonals are based on that individual's point of view. And hopefully, you are looking at the assignments and journals for this unit and watching the Smart History videos I put up on linear perspective. I think I would be very happy if you have already familiarized yourself with Brunelleschi before you're viewing this presentation. But if not, that's okay. This is your starting point, so follow with the instructions on the assignments because they go into more detail on the information I'm providing here. So more wealth with individual patrons who are secular allows for vast building projects and art patronage. So the cities of Florence and Flanders are major trade centers. So their growth of the merchant and banker class is really pronounced there. So we see a lot of new building and a lot of artists working and having patrons commission a lot of work. So that's why these places become art and cultural capitals. It kind of follows in that cycle. So artists such as Giotto, Brunelleschi, and Donatello began to innovate and create a new style of art, which was moving away from the stylization of the Middle Ages towards realism, scientific naturalism, employing linear perspective, mathematics, geometry, and study of anatomy in drawing, painting, and sculpture. So we're reviving this kind of classical interest in the human figure, and we're doing dissections, which hasn't been done for hundreds of years. In the Middle Ages, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, there was a shift away from emphasizing the beauty of the body, because then it was thought, okay, the body is just a vessel for the soul. And so then the soul is the important thing, and we're not going to focus on, the musculature and etc. That, however, is shifting with artists like Giotto. So Giotto is known as the father of the Renaissance. Here is Meeting at the Golden Gate, which I asked you guys to do a formal analysis of, which was great. A lot of you noticed, how the space is kind of flat, but there is kind of a perspective going on based on the positioning of this pillar. It's slightly darker than the pillar on the left. So that was a great observation. There's a lot of contrast going on here between these figures and the cloaked figure. So, what is Giotto doing that's so revolutionary? He's showing us figures in a more human and realistic manner. So, let's talk about that a little bit more. So, if you guys haven't watched the videos yet, I please would like you to do that. It's just the first and fourth of the series on Giotto, on Smart History. So he's reintroducing realism by adding modeling to human figures, and this was kind of ditched by the abstract stylization of earlier medieval and Byzantine styles. So this is a Scrovegni chapel, or arena chapel, and Scrovegni was a banker as well as his father, and so in banking there's this thing called interest, right? If you borrow money, you have to pay that back plus interest. So that's known as usury. And usury is considered a sin in the Bible. So Scrovegni has a lot of money, and so he thought, hey, I'm going to, kind of as a penance, commission this great painter to do an amazing fresco in this chapel I've created. He built the arena, and then he built the chapel, and he wanted kind of maybe some absolution from God to kind of do this good deed to make up for the fact that he's making money by committing usury. And all of these different panels are telling different phases of stories in the Bible. In this particular scene, we see the people who've committed the sin of usury being hung by their money bags. So just to compare that kind of Byzantine medieval style to what Giotto is doing, this is a mosaic in the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy. And this artwork was commissioned, and I believe the church was built by Emperor and Empress Justinian. And by then, the capital of Rome had moved to Byzantine in Turkey. But nonetheless, they wanted to establish themselves as very powerful and having a presence in mainland Italy, so they built this great church and created amazing jeweled mosaic all over the interior surface. But look at these figures. They're very, this is what we call abstract stylization, how they're kind of like flat and linear, not a lot of modeling, not a lot of realism. They're an idealized form of human. How is Giotto departing from that? So look at all this modeling. We see the figures have, musculature. They have expression. Their faces look more realistic. So Vasari, who's one of the first art historians, he wrote an art history book during the late Renaissance, kind of categorizing everything and laying a foundation for art historical study today. He's known as the father of modern painting, and Vasari attributed him to painting in the Latin tradition as opposed to the Greek tradition. So we've abandoned the decorative pattern and complicated line inherited from Byzantine art, right? All the complicated patterning and line and the halos and what have you, to make figures seem more three-dimensional, using light and shadow. We're making these non-secular subject matter, of Jesus and all the apostles and Mary and the angels, we're making them seem as if they're genuinely human and animated by genuine human motivations. And, in that first slide of Meeting at the Golden Gate, the kiss is shared between Joachim and Anne, who are Mary's parents. Okay, so back to linear perspective. Our expert here who pioneered this technique is Filippo Brunelleschi, and he built the dome of Florence Cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore. And what you can notice here is that it's a new style, which he added on this giant dome, kind of imposed on this original structure, which was originally a Gothic structure, as you can see from these turrets. So, while this may not look very fantastic to us, it is one of the greatest examples of architecture because of his innovation in designing this. So he was looking to the classical past with this Roman um, architecture of the Pantheon. So we see this really, really giant, large dome, rounded dome, which is basically, arches in a circular form with these coffers, which are these square carved indentations on the ceiling. So that's what he was looking to for inspiration, but he didn't do exactly that. As you can see, the dome is slightly got some angularity to it. So it isn't going to fully contradict with the Gothic origins. It's almost as if it's a mixture of classical and Gothic architecture. So the reason it's a big deal is Brunelleschi had to do a lot of innovation. This hadn't been done before. The techniques had been lost. He had to create cantilevered scaffolding, and it seemed really impossible, as if the structure, the dome, was going to kind of fall in on itself. So he had to innovate all kinds of engineering machines to bring this architecture into form. So that's why he's kind of known as a master. So just to show you an example of linear perspective, here's a Perugino, delivery of the keys to St. Peter. So what we do is we draw orthogonals to a vanishing point, and we can see that to demonstrate the linear perspective. And we can see that in the flooring here, right? So if we were just going to draw the orthogonals, that's what it looks like. All of them are going to recede to this point in the basilica. So that's linear perspective. And Brunelleschi was devising it in the early 15th century. And Masaccio, who I'm showing here, this is a fresco of the Holy Trinity. He was the first painter to officially use linear perspective in his work, in his drawing and his paintings. So he was also in Florence. The figures I've been mentioning are all operating out of Florence. So Florence is the birthplace of linear perspective. You can kind of maybe remember that. It is kind of a very important trade capital, a lot of capitalism, of economics, selling stuff, banking. So there's a culture of being savvy with numbers. So perhaps that's why there's an emphasis on this mathematical linear perspective, which was not being adopted anywhere else. It was completely just invented here and being done here before it kind of spread out outward outside of Florence to other parts of Italy and then other parts of Europe by the time it was the High Renaissance. So Masaccio made a huge impact on Florentine painting. He was integrating a lot of really realistic figures on a large scale into classic architectural and natural settings using linear perspective and deep space. So here's this kind of viewing point to show you how, maybe you can see how this idea is related to humanism. There's one individual here who's viewing it frontally, and this is how the picture plane is divided on how they're going to look. They're going to look up, and everything's going to match up for linear perspective from this viewing point. So here's another piece by Masaccio, The Expulsion of Adam and Eve from Paradise. So, we're examining the figure here. Masaccio is combining his knowledge of ancient Roman sculpture and human anatomy. So this is in contrast to the Flemish painters, who are more emphasizing the surface details rather than the mass of the underlying bone and muscle structure of the bodies. And notice the light source casting shadows and giving detail on the modeled forms here. Okay, so this is what I wanted you to compare: the style of a Flemish painter, which is, the north area of Flanders, of present-day Belgium, to the style of a Florentine painter. What can we say about the art styles in both regions? So take a moment and maybe take some notes, and we'll be back for part 2 of